I lived in Japan for around 10 months a couple of years back as a part of a study abroad program as my placement year for university. I lived in Hiroshima, and pretty much every Japanese person I met was exactly how you would expect them. Generous and respectful. All except this one old lady who just so happened to live in the apartment next to me. It was about a month after I'd been in Japan when our group decided we were going to the sake festival. For those who don't know, this is a huge sake drinking festival that, from what I now understand, that everyone goes and gets extremely drunk at. As men of fine taste and culture, we sampled many different kinds of sake from all over Japan, and got rode off beyond belief. Then we all got the train home back to our apartments. I can't really remember anything apart from calling my girlfriend at the time and passing out on my futon. Normal stuff. Skip to 6 a.m. the next morning when my loudest crap doorbell wakens me up. I check the time and I'm just confused as anything, but I assume it's just my friend from downstairs who wants to talk about last night. I look through the peephole in my door and I see a police officer just standing there. The first thought that goes through my mind is, Taylor, what the crap have you done when you were drunk last night? But at the same time, I was so sure I just fell asleep right away. I talked to the dude using a translation app, and he basically tells me there's been a noise complaint. I thought this was strange, considering the fact that all I did was make a phone call and fall right asleep. Anyway, the guy sees how confused I am and kinda just sees there must have been a mistake, and then he leaves. I'm honestly still drunk and just super confused, but the day carries on as normal. The next morning at 6 a.m., the doorbell rings. I already kind of assumed what it was going to be this time, and what do I see through the peephole this time? 2 police officers. Same convo goes down, and I convince them that there's been no noise. I literally walk them into my apartment to show them how I fell asleep watching Netflix. They tell me at this point that it's the neighbor who I've never met, and they're making complaints. At this point, I think she's just being mean, or maybe she's a racist. I ask the guy at my uni who takes care of all the foreign students all about this. He tells me that I'm getting moved to a different apartment to a room on the floor below. I'm pretty pissed off because I'd literally just settled into my new space, but whatever. He plans on coming tomorrow morning with the landlord to move all of my crap out and to check that my room is okay. Ever been woken up by something in the middle of the night and it really messes you up? I went to sleep on good time that night and prepped for the people helping to move my stuff out. So naturally, around 3 a.m. I'm fast asleep. Then suddenly my doorbell is just constantly ringing. It's freaking deafening, and of course it's woken me up straight away. I can't even begin to tell you how scared I was. I couldn't even move, and I didn't want to. After about a minute of what felt like non-stop noise, there was complete silence. I make my way over to the front door to look through the peephole, and I see nothing, but I just know it's this psycho crazy neighbor. Nothing else happens for the rest of that night, and I eventually get back to sleep. I wake up the next morning still kinda shaken, but it's cool because my boys are coming round soon. I keep walking out the front to check if they're downstairs and quickly closing my door behind me, because I don't know what this woman will try if she sees me. I walk into my room and the slide door to my balcony is wide open, and there I see her for the first time. This woman literally wrapped her freaking body all around the fence that separates our balconies, all whilst keeping her footing on her side, and is just staring right at me. We stare at each other for a second, and then she quickly whips back around to her side. Literally 2 seconds later, my doorbell rings. At this point, I'm just like, nah, that's not possible. Thank God. It turns out to be the people to help move my stuff, and I tell them what's up and hastily move downstairs to my new room. At one point, I saw the crazy lady outside and pointing to my new room and asking the police if they had come there. I was able to avoid her from that point on. I guess the police decided to start ignoring her calls. This happened to me back when I was around 12 years old. I was going through some of my old cringy notebooks and journals with my girlfriend, and I found my old journal entry where I wrote about this day, and all the memories came flooding back to me. I used to live in what I thought was a really safe and secure private community. I wasn't allowed to just wander around too far from home without supervision, but because our neighborhood was a gated community, my parents would let me walk around within the gates anytime that I wanted, even if they weren't home. One day I was riding around the neighborhood after school when I saw a middle-aged woman crying on the floor of her porch with the front door wide open. I was pretty concerned and got off my bike to see what was wrong. She said that she was having problems with her husband and immediately asked me to come in so I could keep her company while she calmed down. My stranger danger sirens were completely going off, so I declined. She kept pushing me. Please, just for a moment. I just need someone to talk to. Now, I was raised to always respect elders and to be a good person, but I was also raised to know about stranger danger. So being a young naive kid, I actually felt pretty conflicted about whether I should go in or not. Ultimately, I declined repeatedly enough that she instead asked me to wait outside with her and then sit with her until she felt better. I agreed to this since I felt very safe in my own neighborhood. She asked me to wait on the porch for her while she walked into the house and visibly grabbed a couple of framed pictures from off the wall. She then sat down next to me inside the house while I was sitting on the porch just outside of her door. She then started showing me the pictures. One was of a kid older than me in the local high school football uniform, and the other of a man and the same kid. She went on to tell me these stories about how she met him and how they spent their honeymoon in Hawaii and how her kid was so good at football, one of the best on his team. She was very worried that if her and her husband got a divorce, she wouldn't be able to see her kid anymore. And then she started bawling again, this time onto my shoulder. This actually caused me to let my guard down quite a bit. For some reason, once I knew she had a kid, I felt a bit more comfortable around her. She was talking for a while though, and I was beginning to start to feel a little awkward as she was on and off crying on my shoulder, and I didn't know how to react in the situation. What the heck did I get myself into? I kept thinking to myself as I nodded my head pretending to listen. I was more concerned about finding a good excuse to tell her I had to go home. She kept calling me such a young nice boy and telling me, "You have no idea how important it is for you to spend your time with me," which made me feel a little bad about just leaving her. She kept telling me that she wanted to reward me and make me some dinner if I just came in, which I continued to decline. Finally, I told her I had to go, and she asked me if I knew anything about how to turn on her cell phone, as she just got her first cell phone very recently. I told her I did and I could help her out before I left. She told me to wait yet again, and this time left for quite a while. I kept thinking I should just walk away, but part of me didn't want to be rude, especially since she lived right around the corner from my house and possibly even knew my parents. My anxiety levels would spike as I got closer and closer in my head to convincing myself to just stand up and walk away. Then it would just dissipate and I'd tell myself, no, I can't just leave. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she brought me her phone, which was an Android. I had only had an iPhone 3G at the time, and it was my first smartphone, so I was a little worried that I wouldn't know how it worked. I just held the power button down for a second and lo and behold, it booted right up. She asked me then if I knew how to check text messages. I found and opened up the Messages app and there was only one number not saved as a contact in the app. She then pointed to it and said, "That's him. That's my husband's number. Read me his texts." I opened it up. She had received basically the same text over and over again, just multiple variations on hello and please respond. She angrily said to me, "Read them to me right now. I want to know what he said to me." I then tell her. They basically all just say hello with a question mark. She just reaffirmed in a stern voice, "Read them to me." I started reading them. Hello, please respond. She just has her eyes closed and she's nodding sometimes, commenting with things along the lines of, "That jerk, he does miss me. Well, screw him. He had his chance." She then turned quickly from this crying, distraught woman who was worried about her husband leaving her into an angry and spiteful person who felt like she was in the right. There was a couple of times when I stopped reading and I would ask if she wanted me to stop, and she would just snap at me, "Keep reading." Then I would continue. I started to feel like her husband was a crazy person with this many messages. I must have scrolled and read dozens of messages almost identical, spanning back days. My heart was racing. I felt like I was involved in something I shouldn't be involved in. I really wanted to go home, but every time I stopped, she would get really angry and tell me to keep going. That's when I came across the very first message that wasn't hello. "Stop messaging me, you crazy woman. Leave me alone. I've reported you to the police and got a restraining order. If you come anywhere near my family, you will be arrested." My heart sank. That's when I realized all the messages I had been reading so far were being sent from her phone. I paused in shock, and she again snapped at me. "Keep reading." I told her I couldn't because it was getting very late and my parents had dinner for me. She again just said, "Why don't you just come in for dinner? I'll make you something. You can let them know later you are helping your neighbor. They won't be mad, I promise." Only this time she was a mixture of angry and desperate. I told her they would be worried and wonder why I was gone for so long. She pleaded a couple more times for me to not leave her, and she started crying as I stood up. Honestly, I felt really bad about it at the time. I rode my bike home as quickly as I could. My parents had just gotten home from work a little while ago and asked me where I was. I didn't tell them the truth because honestly I was a little worried that they wouldn't let me hang around the neighborhood when they weren't home anymore. A few days later I came home and there were 3 police cars out in front of her house. My heart sank. I asked my parents later that night if they knew what had happened. My dad just said, "Oh, there was just a break-in or something." I later asked one of my neighbors to see if I could get some more information about what happened. Apparently one of my neighbors fell in love with a homeless woman after inviting her in for a shower and a place to stay. He got her some new clothes and a phone and was trying to help her get a job. Turns out the reason she was homeless was because she suffered from mental illness. He then kicked her out when she started having delusions of his kid from a previous marriage being her kid as well. Honestly, he sounds like a really crappy person. She began harassing him after this, so he left the house to his parents' house and then sent the kid to his ex-wife's house. Apparently he was worried for his ex-wife and his kid's safety. He had every right to because shortly after he left, she broke a rear window of his house and then came in. She had been living in the house for nearly a week before a neighbor noticed the broken window and called the police. She apparently trashed the whole house by that point and was arrested. I almost didn't believe it, but I went behind the house and saw the broken window. I guess the guy broke his lease and moved out immediately because he was worried she would come back after getting out of jail. I don't know if she ever did try and come back, but I really hope they disclose this to the new tenants. Honestly, I still get pretty freaked out to this day. Who knows what would have happened if I went into that house. This story happened in summer of 2017. I was working at a pharmacy, and I had been there for about 4 years. A new staff pharmacist around the same age as me, 28, was hired. He seemed pretty odd, but I was nice to him because everyone else was rude to him immediately, and I felt really bad. He asked me way too many questions. Some I answered and others crossed boundaries. Fast forward about a month, he said that he was moving. He lived on the east side of my city, and he said that he was moving to the west side where I live. He said that he actually found a house near the intersection of where I live. I asked him what street, and he wouldn't tell me. He also said that the owner will live there for a few more months, so I forgot about it. Fast forward a few months later, and my mom and stepdad told me that they met our new neighbor. My mom said that he seemed like a really nice young man. The next time I worked with him, I asked if that was him, and he said no. I let it go for a little bit. Then another time he started asking me questions, describing my backyard and asking if my street name started with the letter that it did. So he admitted it was him. I asked him how he knew it was my house. He said that he saw me in the backyard, but he decided not to say anything to me. The next few months were weird. I was still friendly with him as a coworker, but he crossed some boundaries. He knew my birthday was coming up, and my brother was asking for ideas of what to get me. I wanted a certain phone case, so I was browsing on my phone to send my brother links to the ones I wanted. He would always look over my shoulder when I was on my phone. He saw the type of phone case. He got me the phone case and a $150 preloaded Visa gift card. I then told him in a very professional manner that I felt the gift was inappropriate and probably against company policy. I walked over to his mailbox while he was at work to return it. He kept putting it back in my mailbox with messages of begging me to accept it because I make him so happy. I ended up giving it away. Not much longer after that happened, I took my female coworker to the zoo. I had posted some of it on my story on Snapchat. He kept messaging me on Snapchat asking me questions about it, and it was bothering me, so I decided to block him. After that, he called my mother and told her that he needed to talk to her. He told her he needed to come over and talk to her, so she invited him in and they talked. I was very alarmed by this, but my mom thought it was endearing. I told him once again at work that he crossed boundaries, and he said that he does everything he does because he cares about me. He didn't understand where I was coming from at all. Those were the most standout things he has done. Also a lot of pestering about, "Tell me who your boyfriend is," and trying to look at pictures in my phone to figure it out, and also going through coworkers' phones and reading their conversations with me. Even impersonating them while I was not at work to get info. One time he even cornered me at work and he wouldn't leave me alone until I told him what characteristics I look for in a guy. He was also mad at me when he saw that I got a birth control prescription filled, even though it was only being used to correct hormonal problems from another birth control. I started being mean to him at work because I couldn't take it anymore. He told me that I was being mean to him because he's a nice guy who cares about me, and that I'm looking for a jerk. It became a very hostile work environment, and I left about 2 months ago. This is a side note. Other coworkers and neighbors absolutely hate him because he likes to start confrontations. He also likes to play he said she said with people for entertainment. The neighbors have called the police on him and they think he's crazy. I haven't heard from him at all since leaving. I saw my former coworker last week at a get-together, and she said that he's trying to get her to tell him where I work now. He told her that he sees me getting into my car every morning, so he knows I have a job. I told my mom this and she didn't take it seriously. I would just really like to get an outside perspective. Whenever I come home late, I always run to the door, and if no one is home, I will always wait to take a shower. I'm still really scared. When I was about 12 or 13, my mom and dad owned a tow trucking company. This particular day, they went to our neighboring state, so I had a few friends over, and we were there alone. They probably came over at about 12 p.m. in the afternoon. We were doing the normal preteen stuff, watching movies, eating junk food, etc. It was winter, so it started to get dark pretty fast. We were expecting my mom and dad to come home around 6 or 7. A little before my mom and dad were supposed to be home, there was a knock on my door. The way my house was set up was the front door was right next to my living room couch where all of us were hanging out. Anywho, my mom is known for kinda being stuck in the 80s. She always wore a black leather jacket. One of my friends, let's call her Tina, looks through the window of the door and then says, "Hey, it's your mom. I think I see her jacket." I jump up immediately and look through my window. At this time, it's pretty dark and I don't see my father's tow truck. I run to the front door screaming to Tina, "Don't answer the door, it's not my mom." But I was too late. She opens the door, and here comes this 6-foot, 250-pound man with a black stocking over his face running through my door. All of my friends ran out of my living room to the kitchen where the back door is and ran away. Me, on the other hand, I obviously learned that day that my fight, flight, or freeze is to freeze. This man grabs a hold of me and then picks me up in the air. I was so scared that I actually peed my pants. I kind of don't remember how it happened, but I managed to escape his grips and run out my back door down the block to a neighbor's house. We called the cops, and within a couple of minutes there were 6 cop cars, 3 on each end of the block. Come to find out, it was one of my grown neighbors. He allegedly was playing a trick on us. A bunch of little girls. He always was a creep. I'm now 26. To this day, whenever there's a knock on my door, I literally creep around my house so that people can't hear or see me, and I hide until they're gone. This happened a little bit ago, about a month, and it was a bizarre experience to say the least. I'm 15 years old, and I was playing some video games before passing out. It was about, say, 11 p.m. when I hear the doorbell ring. Out of instinct, I begin walking downstairs, but about halfway there, rationality came to mind. Who the heck rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? I silently strode back upstairs and stood in the hall, kinda expecting something bad to happen. An exact minute later, it rings twice. My parents begin to leave their room and give me a quizzical look, and all I had to respond with was a shrug. Then he starts banging on the door. My mother jumps at the first bang, and my father's eyes widened, but more in confusion than fear. He decided to go downstairs and peep through the view hole. It was our neighbor. My dad hesitantly opened the door, and I could hear my father's voice slightly tremble. "Hey, what do you need?" The next thing I hear is an entire full-blown scream argument from our neighbor, claiming that this household was his and we stole it from him. My father's uneasiness was quickly replaced with annoyance, and he simply shut the door without giving our neighbor the time of day. My dad stepped on the first step going up the stairwell when our neighbor first hit the door. Now, I'm not talking banging it with a fist. This man was full-on body slamming it. My father was stunned for a second, and my neighbor charged the door yet again. This time we began to hear the splintering of wood. Everyone reacted at once. My father went to brace the door with his body, my mother went to get the other two kids, and I called 911. The body slamming ensued for another 5 minutes, and while I was on the phone with 911, it stopped. I thought it was over, and I was relieved, but still, I stayed on the phone. I go peek out the front window of my house, and boy, it was only getting started. Our neighbor took his Jeep Wrangler and simply directed it straight at our house. We had zero clue what he was doing until he hit the gas and we heard the squealing of tires. Then he immediately hit the brakes. He was trying to scare us out of the house. I was still on the phone with 911 and I stepped away from the window to comfort my siblings, crack jokes and such. Eventually, the police finally arrived and they arrested him. The very next morning I left for school, still shaken from the night before. I stepped onto our front steps and saw tire marks leading up to our front door. This lunatic actually nearly rammed our door down with his car. I really never want to see this crazy man ever again, but unfortunately he lives directly to my right. Screw my life. I'm a 24-year-old female college student living 2 blocks from school. I've lived in the same spot for 2 years and have never had any issues. I have a small emotional support dog that lives with me too. This will be important later. Things just got weird this last month. A guy moved into the apartment below me. His apartment is to the right of the only stairwell leading up to my house. I always have to walk by his door to walk to class, check my mail, or get into my car. If I had to describe him, he honestly reminds me a lot of Norman Bates. Quiet, strange, small build, pale skin, and bright blue eyes. Something about him just seems off. I first met him when I was trying to leave my apartment. I was about to back up when some jerk pulled out his car, blocking me from exiting. I was getting out of my car to ask him to pull forward when my new neighbor was also getting into his car. Instead of letting me speak to the guy, he told him to move, and I politely said thank you and then left. The next day, he was waiting outside by his bike to go to class. He instead follows me up the hill to make small talk. He asked me a lot of questions which made me feel a little interrogated. Some of the questions were like,
"Where are you from? How old are you? Are you single? How long have you been here?"
2 days later on a Saturday morning, he knocks on my door forcefully at 8 a.m. I jump up out of my sleep and look through the peephole to see him standing there rocking back and forth. Mind you, I've only seen him twice and we've never had a real conversation other than him trying to pry into my life like he knows me. He knocks on my door 3 more times and finally slips something underneath it and leaves. I wait about 10 minutes and open the door to find a note. It said,
"Hey there, neighbor. I just have a few questions about your dog. How do you get away with having her? I want to get one, but I don't know how. I'd love to hear more. Cheers and kindest regards, Jimmy. P.S. Here's my number. Please text me."
I decided not to text him because I don't like telling every person about why I have my dog. It's really no one's business but mine and my realtor's. I was also uncomfortable with the fact that he came to my door with no knowledge that I lived in that specific unit. That's when weird things started to happen. He waits until I leave for school and rides his bike right behind me. About 2 weeks ago, I had to make several trips to my car because I bought groceries, and he stood by his window and watched me the entire time. Every time I go outside now, he watches me with the blinds open. He knows that I've noticed him too, but he doesn't seem to care. He just stares at me with a blank, lustful, creepy look in his eyes. Yesterday, I took my dog outside and he came outside of his house and just stood at the back of the building just to watch us play in the grass. He just stared at me. When I wanted to come back inside, he just watched me walk upstairs and pass him, while he just had a cold look on his face. I've never been a woman who scares easily. I'm fully capable of taking care of myself, but he's making me feel very uneasy. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jacqueline W, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Random Randy, Steph L, Tammy S, and Terry H. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay on.